Now, remember I showed you the picture of the Federalists? And how many were there? Three. Okay? Now, if you'll notice in here, Eldridge, the first two, Eldridge Gerry and George Mason, as I mentioned last week, the first two, I'll say something else in a second, they were the ones that said, absolutely not, we're not taking this Constitution as it stands. We've got to have a Bill of Rights. Okay? George Clinton, very well known. Okay? He spoke out quite a bit. He was well known throughout the entire colonies. Robert Gates was a lawyer. Now, I'm not going to go into every one of these, but he was a lawyer that wrote under assumed names. And actually, because he was a friend of Hamilton's, but went totally against his belief system. Okay. Samuel Bryan, Langton Smith wrote quite a bit in the Anti-Federalist papers. And by the way, all of these, with the exception of Thomas Jefferson, wrote the Anti-Federalist papers on this issue. Okay. Richard Henry Lee, you're familiar with. He was already a president before the Constitutional Convention. Mercy Otis Warren. By the way, we had a woman that was writing Anti-Federalist papers for all the ladies in here. We always are given this idea that the women were never involved in what was going on in this country. Okay, but they were. Patrick Henry, of course, he not only wrote, but he spoke many a time on the Anti-Federalist principles. And of course, Thomas Jefferson. But we're not done. Here's the next set. All of these wrote Anti-Federalist papers that were pushed against the Federalists. John Francis Mercer, Willie Jones, William Grayson, DeWitt Clinton, James Winthrop, William Findley, John Hanson. You remember John Hanson was also a president. Arthur St. Clair, also a previous president. Spencer Rome, John Lansing. And we're not finished yet. Gilbert Livingston, Luther Martin, Eleazar Oswald, and James Galloway, and John Taylor. This is only some of them. These are the primary authors, and when they compiled the Anti-Federalist papers, these were the men that actually wrote those. Okay? There was lots of other Anti-Federalists. So now you've got to ask yourself a question. If you've only got 3 Anti-Federalists and a few of their, close friends, but have no power, no clout, how is it that this many Anti-Federalists did not just win the day? How is that? Any clues? They were swayed. No, it was because the language that was being approached them and all of the conversations that you're having with Hamilton and John Jay and James Madison, especially Madison, made them think, okay, well, we're going to get some guarantees here. We are going to get what we want, and we're guaranteed that this is going to happen. We're going to retain our sovereignty. We're going to retain our independence. The power is still coming. Remember, I told you a little while ago, for almost 30 years, they absolutely believed throughout the colonies that they still maintained absolute state sovereignty, absolute independence, that they could overrule anything that came out of the central government. They absolutely believed it for 30 years. Okay? So they were hoodwinked. That's for the lack of a better term. They were, What changed? Well, we'll get to that in a minute. Objections to the Constitution, I told you about the first two. And because there's so many writings, so many of these that I've just shown you, I'm not going to go through a lot of them. I'm not. I just can't. But the first two that spoke up were some of the most respected. And so on September 12, 1787, at the end of a very long secret constitutional convention, as I mentioned before, Eldridge Gerry and George Mason, both delegates from Virginia, took the lead in objecting to the new Federalist Constitution, and they were followed by many